Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Monday, April 25th, 2022, and today we're going to be talking about the Utah Democratic Party now endorsing independent Evan McMullin to combat Mike Lee, the senator from the state of Utah. A Republican, Evan McMullin, a previous Republican, very, very out of the ordinary for the Democratic Party to endorse a conservative independent. Evan McMullin is a Republican just simply without the title and has embodied many conservative principles and ran on a conservative platform with Mindy Finn back in 2016 and got 22% of the vote in the state of Utah just 5 years ago. So looking at where this headline really plays into the midterms, I will say that this is something that really comes out of a surprise. I don't necessarily find it a surprise that the Democratic Party is being opportunistic, and not that in a way that has a negative connotation, but more so realizing that this is their one and true only opportunity to oust an incumbent Republican senator. But looking at where this plays into the midterm elections, it does shake things up slightly. The Utah Senate election was set to occur this November and still is, but there was going to be a Democrat on the ballot, a Republican on the ballot, and more than likely Evan McMullin, an independent who I'm sure might have already qualified or who certainly would have qualified in time for the November election. Now, Evan McMullin is now in a position where he has the backing of the Democratic Party, which means now he poses a more realistic threat to Senator Mike Lee as an independent who has the backing of both the Democratic Party and a bunch of conservative support. Now, this is not a race because the state of Utah is competitive. This is not a race that is at all talked about because Utah is inherently this swing state, but rather because Mike Lee is so unpopular across the state. There have been many discussions about Mike Lee and his close association with President Trump. And in any red state, you would expect a close association with President Trump to be beneficial. Every red state but Utah, and there's a reason for that. Back in 2012, Mitt Romney won the state of Utah by a margin of 48 percentage points. In 2016, Donald Trump won by just 18 points. Now, Utah narrowed down for the first time in decades. It was never meant to be this close. And looking at exactly how close it ended up being, it was quite a shock. Donald Trump did not even get a majority of the votes as the Republican nominee. Keep in mind, Mitt Romney had just won 4 years prior with nearly 75% of the vote. And he didn't do well. The Democrats did not necessarily do well in the state of Utah, but rather that Donald Trump significantly underperformed. That Donald Trump was such a weak candidate in the state of Utah that he ultimately fell down to 45%. Now, Evan McMullin is this name that we're throwing around, and I mentioned that he ran in 2016, but I want you to take in this number. Around 1 in 5 voters in the state of Utah in the 2016 presidential election backed Evan McMullin over Donald Trump. Donald Trump did not even get, again, 50% of the vote as the Republican nominee. Evan McMullin and Donald Trump's combined vote share brings you around to the similar level that Mitt Romney was at in 2012, but it doesn't actually get you there. The point being that Donald Trump pushed away so many voters that people backed Hillary Clinton or Evan McMullin. And when you take a look at the shift relative to 2012, what you find is nearly every single county in the state of Utah shifted towards the left. In 2020, it ended up going towards the Republican Party. Again, went for them by a pretty good amount. Let's go ahead and see if we can find it here. 2020, the presidential results in Utah were pretty standard, but it ended up going to President Trump by just 21 percentage points. Now, if you look at the significance of this, Joe Biden got 38% of the vote. That is the highest a Democrat has gotten in Utah in quite some time. In 2016, Hillary Clinton just got 28%. In 2012, Obama got just 25%. In 2008, Obama got 34%. In 2004, Kerry got 26%. In 2000, Gore got 26%. In 96, Clinton got 33%. In 92, Clinton got 25%. I mean, you go back and back and back, and what do you find? I mean, the last time Utah was a blue state was with Johnson. So you fast forward all of these election cycles, you go through Bush, you go through Clinton, you go through Bush again, you go through Obama, you go through Trump, and where do we land? In the 2020 election, because President Trump was such a bad nominee, Utah shifted 10 points to the left. There was clearly a pushback on President Trump and Republicans of his stature, and that's exactly why we are now in this position where Mike Lee could potentially lose the Senate election. This is why we are now in a position where the Democratic Party is ultimately backing a conservative independent, a formerly registered Republican, over their own Democratic nominees. They voted 57% to 43% at their convention to not have their own candidate. There was the former State Department official who was the frontrunner and only Democrat running, who has now backed Evan McMullin, saying he supports or respects at least the decision, saying let's get other Democrats elected, but we should all elect Evan McMullin in an effort to defeat Mike Lee. There is a common enemy here amongst the more traditional Republicans that reluctantly voted for Biden or reluctantly voted for McMullin, or potentially eagerly, and also the Democrats who were never going to vote for a Republican in the first place. That's why this is now in discussion. No one could have foreseen this back in 2010 when Mike Lee was elected for the first time with 62% of the vote. When 6 years later, across the 2016 presidential election, despite Evan McMullin getting around 21% of the vote, what you found, Mike Lee defeats Misty Snow by over 40 percentage points. 40 percentage points across a race. Only one county went blue, and barely. Summit County, which normally goes towards the Democratic Party. I mean, what you find in the state of Utah is that Mike Lee was elected by a super significant margin, reelected by an even larger margin, and now has fallen out of public favor. As mentioned in the very early parts of the article here that I'm talking about, it says, in most red states, Donald Trump being associated with this senator, with Mike Lee going potentially too far, wouldn't be a problem. But there is a problem in Utah, because Republicans here, quote, continue to harbor reservations about Trump's character, and the appearance that Lee has bent over backwards to curry favor with the former president is complicating his bid for a third term. Now, this is a lot of discussion. This is a lot of thinking around the Democratic Party's decision and the previous election results, but numbers don't lie. And the most recent polls from B, C rated pollsters, arguably not the best, but certainly data that we have to take into consideration, shows that Mike Lee might be ahead by 24 points, or by 13 points, or by 10 points. But that's with a Democrat in the race. The most recent poll from Dan Jones and Associates shows Mike Lee at 43% of the vote. He is the incumbent Republican who has gotten over 60% of the vote in every Senate election he's ran in. 43% is not at all good. What you find here is that Weston is at 11%. It's clear that the Democratic Party has already pushed away from supporting him in favor of Evan McMullin. Evan McMullin being at 19% means if you combine the respective vote share here, you're already at 30%. But 30% to 43% isn't exactly the best numbers. So let's look at another poll from OH Predictive Insights that shows that Evan McMullin is in a better position than we might think. What they find is that, depending on the potential Democratic nominee, that Mike Lee could actually lose to Evan McMullin. And now that there won't be one, you have to assume that all of these Democratic votes are going to go to Evan McMullin. When you have a statewide party telling you exactly what to do, in addition to the fact that Mike Lee is by far more conservative, more Trump at least, than Evan McMullin, Democratic voters know exactly who to vote for, which is why they were only polling, Democrats being they, at 11-12%, despite routinely them getting 30, potentially 40% of the vote across the state. Those are things that are routine, and they aren't routine in the poll because people were aware. They were recognizing that Democrats had no chance at victory, so why not try another option? The OH Predictive Insights poll shows that Evan McMullin, when combined with Schmidt, I'm not entirely sure his first name or her first name, you combine the two, and you get 34%. To Mike Lee's 36%, that's only a 2-point loss. It could be overturned. You have another poll from OH Predictive Insights, another matchup. You have Weston in the race, the Democratic frontrunner. You add his numbers to Evan McMullin wins that individual matchup. It's interesting to see, though, when you see a head-to-head matchup between Democrats and Republicans, the Democrats in the same poll are only getting 25% of the vote, yet the combined vote for Evan McMullin and a Democrat is routinely about 30%, 35%. Somewhere around 30s, mid-30s, right? So when you see that, you know that there are voters out there that are backing the independent Evan McMullin over Mike Lee. In addition to that, I would like you to take a look at the Republican Party vote share. 45% is a good number when you're up by 20. But when you're talking about another poll, right up with the question of Evan McMullin being in the race, what do you find? The Republicans poll at 36%, 34%, meaning there's about 9% of the voters, depending on who's running on the Democratic side, or 11% that are already committed and willing to vote for Evan McMullin should he be on the ballot. And now it is all confirmed that he is going to be on the ballot, and he is going to get the backing of the Democratic Party. These Utah polls are not a good sign, I should say. Not a good sign at all for Mike Lee. Because as an incumbent senator, the incumbency should carry you so far. And when you have the incumbency and you aren't being carried far, I would like to say that if Evan McMullin was running against a non-incumbent, he actually might be in the lead. And I think this is just really going to show that President Trump sometimes can be a hindrance to a candidate. I do think Mike Lee is still very much going to win this race. I also am a believer that should Evan McMullin end up in the United States Senate, he would not caucus with the Democratic Party, but rather caucus with the Republicans. It makes sense in terms of what he stands for, in terms of who he represents, and in terms of how he was, in a sense, elected primarily on the backs of conservative voices. Democrats, of course, backing him props him up, but I wouldn't exactly say that, had he ran as a Democrat, that he would have been able to win. He's winning because he's appealing, because he's a conservative, and Republicans would trust him, and they don't like Mike Lee. This was a very similar case to what happened in 2016. There's a reason why Evan McMullin got 21% of the vote. There were reservations from more traditional, more moderate Republicans that were saying, we don't want President Trump, or at the time, we don't want Donald Trump to be in office. So consequently, they voted for an independent candidate. Now, I would like to also say that I think Evan McMullin could do better in a Senate election because the stakes are a lot lower than a presidential election. In addition to that, taking a look at where we are right now, where you have 21% of the vote from the final results from 2016, the numbers show Evan McMullin ahead by a larger amount than that sometimes, especially now that he is going to have the Democratic Party vote. I mean, should you combine the final results between Hillary Clinton and Evan McMullin from 2016 and give it to either Clinton or Evan McMullin, guess who wins? Evan McMullin or Hillary Clinton. This is exactly what I think the Democratic Party is trying to prevent the vote splitting of and encourage collaboration. Because they know that looking at previous election results and the polling data now, that it is possible to oust a Republican, especially if they are associated with President Trump. There is a reason why this has been done. Democrats wouldn't make a decision such as this if it didn't make sense. Democrats know that this is the right decision. Ben McAdams, the only Democratic representative from Utah for the past decade, at some point served for just 2 years, who ran in a red district and won, might I add, a Republican plus 15 partisan lean district that he won in. Ben McAdams advocated for the endorsement of Evan McMullin, because there is a collective enemy here amongst traditional Republicans and Democrats, and that is Senator Mike Lee, and more so, President Donald Trump. I think at the end of the day, it has become very clear why Evan McMullin is even in the running for this. It has become very clear. When you take a look at some counties from 2016, Evan McMullin came in second place. Only in some of these major counties did Hillary Clinton actually win the plurality or majority of the vote. But you take a look at practically, any other Republican county, and you find that Evan McMullin outpaced Hillary Clinton. So when you take all of those Clinton votes and allocate them to Evan McMullin, guess what happens? McMullin ends up winning. The Democratic Party is smart for this decision because Evan McMullin would more than likely be okay with backing Democrats on some points because he has been associating himself partially with the anti-Trump, more pro-Dem type of Republican Party. Now, Republicans were never pro-Democrat, but in 2016 and 2020, they pushed back on Trump. In 2020, John Kasich, the former governor of Ohio, who was fourth place in the Republican primary in 2016, backed Joe Biden and spoke for him at the Democratic National Convention. You have a Republican governor who was elected and won the primary there, super popular at the time, no longer for obvious reason, backing Joe Biden. Things like that are the Republicans, and people like that are the Republicans that Evan McMullin has associated himself with. And I think that's where you start to see the collaboration between the two, but he's still, at the end of the day, a conservative. And he will more than likely side with conservatives on most issues. But this time, he will be doing so by ousting an incumbent Republican. I mean, for me, I'm typically one to root for the underdog. I do think that it would be nice to see an independent voice in the Senate, but I do know that like Bernie Sanders, like Angus King, you will be forced to choose a political party. You can't go into the Senate and remain an independent because you won't get committee assignments, you won't get the same type of staff, you won't get the same type of support, and you'll pretty much just be moving back and forth. At the end of the day, if Evan McMullin wants to keep this seat, he can't side with the Democratic Party. He might be able to vote occasionally, such as Mitt Romney, but once he's in there, he's going to need to switch to the Republican Party, at least caucus with them, and represent them in Washington, D.C. Because Utah is not a blue state, and to completely move away from the entire voting base that you have, or at least the significant portion of the voting base that you have, is a bit disingenuous and unfair to the constituents that did elect you. But I'm not here to police their decisions. I'm here more so to predict what I think Evan McMullin is going to do and what potentially could happen after this decision. I'm excited to see another poll that will come out hopefully soon from the state of Utah that questions voters on whether or not they will now support Evan McMullin, Democrats and independents and conservatives and Republicans and liberals, whatever, alike. Because I think now we see a consolidation behind one candidate, except this time it's Republican versus Republican, which makes it palatable for these Utah voters. They already vote red, so there is a possibility that they do vote for Mike Lee, but his unpopularity is something that cannot be ignored. There's a reason Evan McMullin is making headway, and there's a reason why polls don't show Mike Lee up like they used to. He's no longer in that position where he's winning 61 to 68% of the vote. Now he's in a position where he's going to have to fight for the Senate race because he faces not a Democrat, but instead a Republican like himself who has the backing of the Democratic Party and many, many Republicans. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch, and then a playlist for my 2022 Senate election analysis videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.